So my mom has dementia, and so working here, and I'm getting a lot of training, but I'm also getting paid while going through the apprenticeship, and so it has really helped me with just unexpected bills coming up, and also just kind of motivates me to just come in every day and give it my best and continue learning, continue growing in my career.
It will help me in my personal life by gaining a solid foundation in my career-wise and in my finances-wise, and especially earning a college degree.
So it was important for me to be able to work and go to school at the same time to be able to pay my bills. So this presented a perfect opportunity to do both simultaneously. And then once I got in, I found out that I really like to work with my hands.
There are a few things that I wish I knew before I joined the apprenticeship program. More that it wasn't male dominated, as that's what I was taught as I grew up. And I wish I knew how much fun I could have in my career.
One of the things with going through the apprenticeship is some of the friends that I've made and people that I'll spend time with outside of work and on the weekends. And it's just really cool that I probably wouldn't have met them if I wasn't doing this job, and that we can have a professional working relationship and then also spend time and just relax on the weekends too.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Allison Grealis, and I am the founder and president of the Women in Manufacturing Association. And I'm so happy to have you join us for today's webinar to dive into the very important topic of registered apprenticeship programs. The Women in Manufacturing Association for the past 14, almost 15 years has been passionate around women in industry and helping people find pathways to advancement in this industry and in their careers. One of those great vehicles for advancement and training and education is through formalized programs called Registered Apprenticeship Programs. Today, we are going to discuss the success and the journey and some of the pitfalls and lessons learned from two manufacturing leaders as they discuss their company's journey into registered apprenticeship programs. We have a very valued partnership with Jobs for the Future, a wonderful agency and organization that can support you and your companies as you investigate registered apprenticeship programs as a workforce development tactic and tool. And they as well can be a great connector to resources and funding that can help you along the way. So as an association, as I said, we're happy to have two featured industry experts join us for this discussion today. The first is Susan Emmerich with BASF. She is a board member for our Education Foundation, an industry leader with a very diverse path and journey to manufacturing. And she, in her current role, leads manufacturing talent program implementation at BASF. So she's going to walk us through some of her lessons learned and a little bit and share insights as to BASF's journey with registered apprenticeship programs. And secondly, we have Amy Volz with Trane Technologies. Amy is a former board member of the Women in Manufacturing Association. She's also a passionate person around workforce development and currently sits in it as a director of workforce innovation at Trane Technologies. So please help me in welcoming Susan and Amy to our discussion today, where we will dive into this exciting topic of registered apprenticeship programs. So welcome, Amy, and welcome, Susan.
Thanks, Allison.
Hello, Allison.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us to discuss this very important topic and to share your insights with those listening today who, again, might be either looking to reboot an existing program that they have or maybe looking to start altogether new, a registered apprenticeship program. So first and foremost, I would love to hear from both of you kind of how your company started or decided to start a registered apprenticeship program. So maybe we'll start with you, Susan. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the why registered apprenticeship programs were something that BASF had investigated and decided to deploy.
So back in actually 2018, there was actually a work stream within our Manufacturing Community Steering Committee, which is composed of our VPs of operations. And so this WIM, it's called the WIM work stream, actually developed the proof of concept paper. And what was the mission was really to meet BASF's manufacturing talent gap by tapping into the full talent pool, which would include females and other underrepresented groups. And we had and still have the aspirational goal of moving female composition in all the technician roles to 30% by 2030. In addition, we wanted to provide our sites with a ready and an upskilled technician pipeline. Upskilled meaning they definitely would be going to college, as well as having, on-the-job training in the plants, but also, obtaining EHS values, which is extremely important to BASF.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. And then Amy, can you talk a little bit about why Trane had first arrived at a registered apprenticeship program model?
Yeah, so Trane Technologies is a global climate innovator. A little bit about us, we operate in several market verticals, two of which are residential and commercial HVAC. So when we talk about commercial HVAC, we're looking at schools, hospitals, office buildings, sports stadiums, big commercial applications throughout the United States. And the talent for that side of the business, the need for that talent was really growing, but our challenge was not dissimilar from the talent challenge that a lot of organizations had. An aging workforce, a significant proportion of that workforce was sort of primed for retirement within the next decade or so. And there just weren't enough people in the market who had the skills that we needed in order to grow in the way that we needed to grow as an organization. And so for us, we knew that it was not so much about going out and finding the available talent in the market as it was about really building a talent pipeline for the future and for one of our most critical market segments. So when we looked at apprenticeship programs, it was about sort of investing in the generational impact of these types of programs and thinking very proactively about the type of pipeline we wanted to have in these roles. But also, and Susan touched on this a little bit, the HVAC industry is an industry that only has about 1% to 2% women in the industry. And we've always looked at challenges like this as an organization and sort of charged boldly forward towards those challenges. And this was no different, where we looked at that challenge and saw a program like this as an opportunity to really change the composition of the industry and shift the waterline a little bit, particularly where representation of women is concerned.
Excellent. So obviously lots of open manufacturing positions, as you both cited, and this being one solution where you could take existing talent, develop their skills, give them portable skills and credentials. So when you first brought this, Amy, to your leadership, what was their response? What was their support level like? Or was this something they were already on board and educated about?
So on board. I have been overwhelmed by the tremendous leaders that we have within this organization, and the passion for apprenticeship and the passion for building a pipeline for these roles was absolutely something that at the top line, our leaders in the business were very, very passionate about and very behind from the beginning. And I think that's so important for any program like this, to have that strong top-down support, to have the sponsorship. One of the things that we did very early on was kind of build a coalition of those top line leaders so that we had strong support in all aspects of the business where we needed it to ensure that the program could have some sustainability. And I should mention too, our program is much newer than Susan's. It's really kind of started in the early part of 2023. So we're just now rounding the corner into what'll be almost 2 full years now, coming into January of next year. So in those early stages, that top line leadership support was really critical.
Excellent. Susan, what was your leadership's response to this program and solution?
Well, again, we were so fortunate that it came from our leadership, right? From our vice presidents of operations across all the divisions, which is unique, that it was more top down, like, how do we do this? We know we need this. And how do we do this? And the proof of concept paper gave an outline, but there really, back in 2018, there wasn't that many, maybe a couple, handful, maybe at the most, of manufacturers that had apprenticeship programs. So it's not like Europe, where it's part of, their kind of essence of the technician roles. So both myself as well as Dan Smelker-Cheeseman, who's the program manager for our apprenticeship program, we were hired to essentially take that concept paper and make it live and implement it, design and implement it. And so we really launched it in 2021. So it's been about, almost 4 years, 3 to 4 years. Yeah, we're going into our 4th year.
So you're both at different maturity levels, but still fairly new for both of your organizations as you've adopted these programs. And how many sites, just offhand, do you folks have participating in registered apprenticeship programs? I know, Susan, you've cited before, I think you started with just a few and now
Yes.
it's multiplied
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about, I think it's 22 sites that we're up to. I do have a slide on that later.
Okay, excellent. And Amy, do you have a good number of sites participating to date?
Yeah, we're all across the United States. So 30 states so far, and close to 200 apprentices in 24 months, which is pretty great.
That is phenomenal. So, I mean, for many who are either listening today live with us or maybe in a recorded fashion later, we know that this can seem daunting to get started with launching a registered apprenticeship program. So perhaps each of you can talk a little bit about what were some of those resources that you leveraged or those places that you went for information when you were beginning this whole process. Maybe you can speak to that first.
I was gonna say, I'll jump in because Susan was actually one of the early folks that I reached out to. And I feel like I have to pause here and just say, I feel like this space, apprenticeships, is a space where I've rarely met such passionate people and so many people who have given so freely of their time and resources. And so, Susan, a very public thank you for your willingness to sort of open the door to a fellow woman leader and a fellow apprenticeship coordinator and share expertise. I think that's very true, certainly, of a lot of companies that are in this space. Is these programs take a lot of work. They take a lot of work, and what tends to happen with a program like this, and I think that with a lot of organizational initiatives that we might have throughout our careers, is once it sort of the initial lift happens, it's like, oh great, let's move on to the next thing. And it's like, wait, actually, there's a lot of infrastructure behind these programs. And so I think having the ability to connect with people who are actually in it and are willing to be very realistic about what it takes is super critical. I also have to go back to my experience with women in manufacturing. Allison, you mentioned I'm a former board member, and as part of my tenure, was pretty active in Summit in the past. And Summit, if those of you are on the call today haven't been to a Women in Manufacturing Summit, I highly, highly recommend it. They're fabulous events. And at one of those Summit programs, Jobs for the Future was talking about apprenticeships, and I was blown away by the fact that we had a resource who not only had access to a lot of expertise, but again, was willing to provide expertise to organizations to make them better for free, like at no incremental cost. How often does that happen in corporate life, that you have an organization is willing to, again, give freely of their time and no incremental cost, and to have that happen during, again, an event that has all these incredible women ready to engage and are doing great things. So Jobs for the Future is a fantastic resource. They have a lot of free resources available, one of which is a playbook for DEI and apprenticeships that we found to be particularly helpful as we were kind of starting our journey. But I think there's just a plethora of resources in that space, and being willing to engage and just be open about the fact that you don't know everything. No one knows everything when they first start, and reach out to folks. I think you'll find that there are a wealth of resources available to you, both people who are willing to engage and also a lot of digital resources as well that you can share freely within your organization.
That's great. Amy, and I know Amy mentioned Jobs for the Future. I know we'll have a slide later on that will give you a link to just some of those resources and how you can connect with them if you would like assistance and help and consult as you're going through this journey. So, Susan, resources that you folks leveraged or tapped into, I know you were a little earlier in the stage of establishing a program. So are there things that were especially helpful for you and your company?
Definitely. So we work through the local workforce centers for wage reimbursements that give you up to about 640 hours, equating to about $10,000 per apprentice. So that's something we tap into. Not every state has it, but many do. The way we designed it also in terms of our program, we really wanted the manufacturing sites to bear the cost, because then they would own it and they would make sure it works, and they would hopefully make sure that there are positions at the end of the day for those apprentices to place off in. So the thing that we did in our company is that we also have a North American cost center, which bore the head count for the apprentices. And that was a huge incentive, and still is, for the majority, if not all, of our sites. So I would say that between holding the head count until they transition off, along with some of the local workforce centers for wage reimbursements, were huge incentives.
That's excellent. So, as you mentioned, for each of you, this process of launching a registered apprenticeship program takes a lot of work, a lot of resources. And, of course, once you've put in all these resources and people hours, you hope you'll have lots of positive outcomes. Can you share just a few of the positive outcomes that your organization has experienced since launching a registered apprenticeship program? Maybe we'll start with you, Susan.
Sure. Could I have a slide, please, Jen?
I think Jen.
Yep.
There you go.
So just wanted to give you a few stats here, and that kind of show how we've progressed. So since 2021, we went from 28 apprentices with 2 technician apprentice roles to then 69 apprentices with 7 technician roles. We're 91 hires plus for 2024 with 10 technician apprentice roles. We basically can apprentice just about any technician role, and are even looking to apply our apprenticeship program to engineers, which is something that's coming down the pike. We've gone again, really from 5 participating sites in 2021 to now 24 sites participating in 12 states. And of course, our college partnerships are up to 24 now. But I think what's really important are some other points besides these. Number one is that we have ranged anywhere from 20 to 40% selection rate of females in our program. And we've actually created what we call an apprentice lift at the sites, in which it's really our program that has increased the number of females by 18 percentage points at those sites. So it's been a very important part of our DE&I program. We definitely have created a very work-ready and upskilled pipeline, and I'll show the business case later today. We have about an 84% retention rate, which is actually quite excellent, because we're assuming that most pre-entry level people are trying this out. They're trying to see, is this the career path for me? So we would expect some of them to, to either terminate or decide on a different path. So at 84% retention rate's fairly good, knowing that this is pre-entry level. Our most recent actually survey, we found that 100% of the apprentices, this is at the end of their program, they're surveyed, said that they would stay at BASF if offered a similar role. And then 94% said that they would see themselves in a technician role beyond 3 years. And then I would say the most recent development that we're very excited about is that we've grown the apprenticeship program into kind of another professional development opportunity for internal employees who want to change their roles, say from an operator to a mechanic, and then also for to transition contractors who want to stay and get a FTE or a full-time equivalent position in BASF. So we're really excited about that happening now. So
that's excellent. I mean, what success you've had over just these last few years in terms of participating sites and active hires and people filling these technician apprenticeship roles. So exciting stuff. And again, this is so new yet yielding great results, which is obviously what you were hoping for, I'm sure, is an outcome. And Amy, I know you're newer in this journey for registered apprenticeship programs and adoption at your sites, but what have been some of the positive outcomes that you folks have experienced?
Yeah, so as you said, newer program, but one that's growing really orders of magnitude. We have 2 cohorts per year, and each cohort sort of steps us up yet again. So over the last couple of years, we've seen what's effectively an 8x growth curve, which it's like a rocket ship. So I think that's fantastic. But one of the things I'm proudest of is the mix of people that we see in these programs. So for our apprenticeship program, we're at about 40% underrepresented populations, and we have a number of women in the program now, which I started by talking about the industry-wide challenges that we have with 1 to 2% women in HVAC. Our apprenticeship programs 2 or 3 times above industry average, and I'd love to see more as well. But we have grown just so fast in a short period of time that I'm heartened by that growth. One of the things that I love hearing about the most, and I think one of the more meaningful aspects about this for me personally, is the impact that our apprentices share in how this is making a difference in their lives. So we had an apprentice a few months back that I was speaking with in our Southeast region, and he shared that, you know, this was a complete career pivot for him. He was in the retail industry for a number of years, working super long hours, kind of getting burnt out. Pay was not advancing at the rate that he wanted. And so he came from a completely different industry and essentially used this as a reskilling opportunity to get into what is a really lucrative career with high growth potential, and that really provides a strong foundation from which he's got a ton of career potential within Trane. So we hear stories like that, and it's a complete sort of reimagining of what we think about with apprenticeship programs to some extent, because often when you hear apprenticeship, you think like very early career, very young, you know, folks who don't have a lot of work experience. About 2/3 of our apprentices have been in the job market for a while. They're above the age of 30, and they're using this as an opportunity to get into a different career. I also heard from one of our apprentices in Florida, and he was sharing that he had spent a lot of time in the children's hospital in the area when he was younger. So he had some health issues, and he had been in the children's hospital for many years of his life when he was younger. He's based in the Jacksonville, Florida area, and he grew up, went into Trane and became a commercial HVAC service technician apprentice in our program. And as part of their role, these apprentices are on site with these big commercial customers servicing Trane equipment. And one day, one of the customers that he was servicing was the very same children's hospital that he had spent time in when he was a young child. And so he sort of had this full circle moment of realizing that as an apprentice, he's now, one, not only contributing to his community in a really meaningful way, but he's in a very real sense kind of giving back and helping make sure that the children who are in the same situation that he was when he was younger are as comfortable as they can possibly be, are safe, and that the hospital is able to run efficiently as well. So just stories like that, I think, which they don't show up on a balance sheet, right? It's not part of the sort of quantitative value of an apprenticeship program, but stories like that are really tangible in terms of how these programs make an impact individually and generationally in people's lives. And I think that's just such a really a powerful benefit of apprenticeship programs broadly.
That's huge. I mean, what a cool story that is. I mean, to go full circle with someone who, as you know, a younger individual was helped and supported by an institution that they then in turn were providing services to at a later date. I mean, that's very powerful. And I love the comment too about debunking myths, because I think we too often do think that apprenticeship programs are just designed for early career, new career, those at a certain age range and or established part of their career journey. And as you said, it's a great opportunity for people to reinvent and to reskill and to find a whole new pathway in manufacturing. So really exciting. And as you talked about impact, I mean, we think about the impact that people gaining credentials and skills has on them providing for their families, on them being more financially secure, for them having more confidence and being more professionally just generally confident in the workplace. So, I mean, lots of positive outcomes. So thanks for sharing both of yours that your company's experienced. So, you know, obviously this has been a journey for both of your organizations over the last few years. And if you were to think in present seat, what are some of the things that you would have liked to have known or that you wish you would have thought about when you first got started on establishing and launching a registered apprenticeship program? What might those be? And perhaps we could start with you, Susan.
Well, for us, of course, there was a lot of things we would have loved to have known early on and had to kind of experiment. But I don't know, I think overall, when I was thinking of this question, I would say that one of the biggest things that would have been really useful if there had already been a business case done, that we could have used to convince more people, at the sites that essentially, which I can show you on a slide, if Jen, if I could have that slide, that pretty much shows that our apprentices are pretty much trained and are also, for the cost, for pretty much the same amount of cost, they're trained around the same amount of time before they add value, just, compared to a fully trained FTE. So that's huge, that there really isn't a lot of cost, involved with an apprentice that isn't going to return value nearly the same amount of time as bringing on an entry level technician. So I think, obviously for a lot of our workforce, they were really trying to think through, gosh, is this going to really pan out for us? Are we going to make these investments and they're going to leave and we're going to be out? And there was just a lot of, concerns that, there were concerns, particularly at one very large site about, well, maybe we just hire them, as contingent workers. And that way, if they don't work out, we can get rid of them. And so that would be the exact opposite of what we were trying to accomplish, which really was to train these early in career, but also, as you said, mid-career. A lot of ours come from mid-career that want to change in their career, to train them, to invest in them, and then to, build that pipeline that we were looking for. So yeah, a business case would have been great. Now we've got it. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great data that you've collected. And obviously, business decisions are made on intelligence. And so being able to show here kind of how those people are kind of up and ready and skilled for the job, just as quickly as their counterparts is huge. So Amy, any things you wish you had known when you folks first started in this process a few years back?
I think, one thing I reflect on a little bit is registered apprenticeship programs have a fairly prescriptive structure in that regardless of the industry or the company that you work with, if it's a registered apprenticeship program, there typically is a component of RTI or related technical instruction, your on-the-job training, and mentorship. And so you've got kind of three components that look like a pretty structured container. And that's true, but I think what's also true is there's a lot of room to innovate around the edges within that framework and outside of it, so that your program can be even more impactful than it might appear on paper. So I would just say, I think one thing that sort of helped us initially was to be able to use that container as a starting point and not a recipe for success in itself. And what I mean by that is we sort of looked at the different elements of that framework and looked at ways in which we could challenge our own assumptions or kind of push the edges of what might be possible in that space, with the intent of opening it up to the broadest and widest pool of talent available. So for us, one of the aspects that we looked at was the related technical instruction part of the program. And we just started asking questions. And I think, I've sort of said this a couple of times, like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say what you don't know. Don't be afraid to reach out. I guarantee you reach out, you're going to have a number of people reaching back and pulling you forward and upwards, because these programs have such impact and there is such opportunity for our workforce collectively. But RTI is a great example of that for us, because as soon as we started sort of questioning what might be possible there, the solutions that came back to us were ones that ultimately allowed us to remove barriers to entry for underrepresented populations and for people who might not have access to or the opportunity to attend RTI in the traditional format, which is typically going to a community college or going to a second location, so to speak, and performing those learning after working hours. And so RTI for a single mom, as an example, might mean that you work a full 8 to 10 hour day. You then have to find transportation to another location, get to that location, which could be 30 minutes or 90 minutes to get to your second job where you're learning and doing your RTI. And then you come home and you do it all over again, rinse and repeat, right, for the next 4 years. And so we saw that as an opportunity and sort of questioned our existing assumptions, and I think the assumptions of how these programs are typically run. And while that model has a lot of value and benefit, we saw that also as an opportunity where we could start to innovate around that recipe a little bit. And we brought our RTI platform online, which we've since heard from apprentices. One of the gentlemen in our program is a military spouse. His wife is in the military. And so one of the things he loved about the program was as she gets deployed and they have to move across the country, he's not having to kind of pick up and start again. His program experience is seamless from state to state, from location to location, wherever they go. So that's, I think, one aspect of how we thought a little bit more broadly around that recipe, but also leveled it up to think about the ways in which our company culture and who we are as an organization can be infused into that program. Because we are very intentional about uplifting the experience of our employees and thinking differently about ways in which our experiences might influence our ability to, be engaged on the job or to learn effectively. So I think, being willing to ask questions and question your own assumptions as an organization versus just sort of going, well, here's what it is. It has to be very prescriptive. I think it's something that, we tried to do early on and that I would definitely recommend to others as well.
I mean, that's huge that you folks were able to address accessibility, which we know can be a huge challenge, and to have then created a solution with your RTI being something that's digitally accessible, which is huge. So how long, just diving into that for one little mini microsecond, how long did that process take to create this online platform for people to be able to access? Was that a pretty large lift?
Well, we benefit, I think, here again, a great example of using the resources that are available. We benefit from leveraging an existing education provider. So while we did customize a lot of aspects of the program and sort of built them internally in-house to infuse a lot of that Trane culture and knowledge, as well as the program and product expertise, the RTI component, we were fortunate in finding a provider that's industry recognized, certified, and offers that experience more broadly.
Excellent. So as we talk about advice and lessons learned, is there one piece of advice that you would have for any of the companies participating today or industry leaders that are online with us that you would want to impart on them as they start thinking about launching a registered apprenticeship program or, strengthening an existing program that they may have? What might be that one piece of advice you might leave them with? And I'll start with you, Susan.
I would say make sure that you have as your mission to customize the program to each target audience, and don't make it one size fits all for the program. Use focus groups or surveys or one-on-ones, on the shop floor and at the various plants to really get a sense of exactly what their workforce needs are. Because if you know exactly what their needs are, you'll likely be successful in meeting those needs. And the customization really, for our company, in which we have a lot of mergers and acquisitions, in which every plant is run very differently, and it just was perfect. We could, again, customize it for each site. We still do that, and we meet each site exactly where they're at. And so that would be my greatest and one piece of advice.
Customization and listening and knowing those needs of each facility and site. So
Yes.
Amy, what might your final piece of advice or a lasting piece of advice you might want to leave with the audience?
I have two, actually. So
you can do two.
number one is the big one that we started with, which is like find your champions, right? I think Susan and I both benefited from having leaders who felt very strongly about doing this work and those champions are somewhere within your organization. And maybe it's the senior leader, maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's somebody who's been quietly toiling away in a corner somewhere and going, why don't we have an apprenticeship program? I guarantee you there's someone or more than someone within your organization who feels really passionate about this work. And I would say, find them, find those champions and bring them into the work. And the second piece of advice that I would have is to bring people to the table, to create that coalition internally. We benefited, I think, within Trane of having not only a lot of passionate people, but also a lot of people who brought a lot of institutional knowledge, people within the business who had been in the dirt and they had these roles and they had seen or attempted apprenticeship programs or different types of technician learning opportunities throughout their careers. People who were already mentoring younger folks within the organization and investing in early talent and had, again, a lot of passion and a lot of knowledge in that space. And people who had kind of brought together and invested in creating the next generation of workers for their one pocket of the business or their one part of the world. And having those perspectives and knowledges together in one conversation and really actively bringing the business, the corporate teams, the HR partners, and on all areas of the organization together to make something versus it being something that came from, one region, one business, one part of corporate HR, I think was ultimately something that made our program much better. And I think will help make it much more sustainable as well.
Excellent. Great advice. So I know we wanted to leave some time for our folks joining us today to ask questions. So I will pass it over to Jen Amburn to throw questions our way if any have been posted or posed. And again, encouragement, if you're on the line listening today and you have a question, there is no stupid question and nothing that you should not feel free to ask. So if you have a question for our two knowledge experts, feel free to shoot it into the chat or text so that Jen can post it to our group. Any questions, Jen, that you've received?
I haven't received any, which just tells you how great Susan and Amy have been doing today.
They're very thorough. So if there are no questions being received into the chat, we did want to share some resources and leave you with some additional things that you can look into if your company wants to proceed in embarking on a registered apprenticeship program installation and launch. So I think the next slide here is going to show, here's a QR code. So we have a whole dedicated area of our website that addresses registered apprenticeship programs. Again, Jobs for the Future is an amazing resource. Amy cited the at no cost services and counsel they can give you as your company evaluates an event registered apprenticeship program or solution. So if you scan this QR code, it will bring you to that landing page. Jen and our team has produced a record number of videos and testimonials from differing companies of all different sizes as to both the employee experience and the company experience as they've gone about embarking on a registered apprenticeship program after they've successfully launched one. So those videos are great resources and as well, again, great links on this landing page. So I encourage you to check it out. And as well, Jen Amburn, who's with us on the call today, she is our primary liaison working with Jobs for the Future. So you can email her at any time with specific questions and also with a request for us to make an introduction directly to our program managers at Jobs for the Future. So please know that she is there to stand by as a resource. And then also we did want to mention that Jobs for the Future, their open call for funding. So I think it was mentioned perhaps by both of our folks that there is a lot of money that can be requested and or applied for federally as it relates to registered apprenticeship programs. There's also a lot within your individual states. So again, Jobs for the Future can be a great navigator for you to help find those resources. So as of January 1, their funding cycle begins for 2025. So I would encourage you again to click on the QR code. It will bring you to more information on that application process and to request to be notified when that goes live. And again, there's money there to be had. So if you're training, if you're committed to register apprenticeship programs, why not tap into some of these financial resources and incentives that are out there? So I would encourage you to check out that form and scan that QR code. Any final things, Jen, that have been requested or any other questions we may have missed?
No, I think they answered them all for us today.
Excellent. Well, I just want to go on record to say thank you, Amy. Thank you, Susan. You folks have been such great ambassadors and knowledge experts for Registered Apprenticeship Programs. And we greatly value all the great work that your companies are doing and that you are doing to support the workforce of the future. So thanks for sharing your expertise and knowledge and passion today on this webinar. And I'm sure all the folks that participated benefited from you sharing. So thank you so much for being a part of this webinar, and the best of continued luck in your programs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Thanks, take care, and thanks to everybody
Take
for
care.
joining today. And recording will be shared, so I think a few people had requested. We have recorded today's session, and that will be going live on our Registered Apprenticeship Program website. And then as well, I believe we will send it to all participating folks in the after notes and the survey. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks.
Thank you.